We are going to move to the second talk in this second part of the session, which is from Professor Manuel Fankhauser from Seerave Foundation with the talk, Role of Foundations in the Microbiome Vault Initiative. So thank you so much, Professor Fankhauser, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. And can you hear and see everything well?
Perfectly. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Well, it's been really fascinating listening to all of the science so far. Thank you so very much for all the hard work all over the world, essentially. I think my talk is going to be slightly different. It's going to give you a very high-level view from a philanthropic entity, a foundation who has been supporting the vault over a few years. So it's going to be, I think, a little bit exotic for most of the scientists, but hopefully there's bits and pieces for you in there as well that can inspire you going forward. And so today's menu within 15 minutes would be just quickly talk about who is our foundation, Seerave, how did we initially get engaged with the Microbiota Vault Initiative, and then indeed talking a little bit about what is the role of foundations in the initiative as a whole. So focusing first on who are we, Seerave. The founding moment of this family foundation was the following. Eva Rees, who is the dear wife of our founder, David Rees, received essentially deadly stage 4 melanoma diagnosis back in 2013. This was before immunotherapy was standard of care. And so after there was surgery done to her to remove her lung metastasis, there was essentially nothing else to do. And at the time, there was no input on lifestyle, nutritional interventions that could help manage her conditions. And so both David, who's a very proactive partner of Eva, and Eva have been a bit desperate because they thought, well, can we not at least try to do the best as patients and family to get Eva through this? And so as anyone would do, right, they started to Google, probably, started to look at available things on the internet, on science. And what they came across, which really fascinated them, was this really enlightening concept to them, which is very simple to all of you, because as Lars also just showed, right, this idea of short-chain fatty acid production by the microbe is known to any microbiologist, but not necessarily to lay people. And so when they figured out that dietary fiber are converted by microbial genes in the human gut into active compounds, short-chain fatty acids, and that these would actually lead to health benefits through interacting with human genes, they were very, very inspired. And of course, it led to this idea that is going around broadly in the field that, well, we're really only 1% human and 99% microbial. And so the foundation then started with this philosophy that the future of medicine is probably really to consider this entire ecosystem, which would include both human and microbial genes. And it also became clear to David and Eva early on that what we currently know is really only the tip of the iceberg. It became clear to them 6 years back that this science was pretty in its infancy, but that there's a lot of exciting things that are relevant to therapeutic and diagnostic purposes here to discover. And that's why they incorporated Seerave, and you will now realize where Seerave comes from. It's the inverse of Eva Rees. So it has nothing to do with a sea rave or a lake party, unfortunately. What we are today is a proactive small family foundation. As I mentioned, we're working on what we call the nutrition, microbiome, immune system axis. So we're really eager to figure out how can one possibly modulate this axis, be it through nutrition, through prebiotics, probiotics, symbiotics, whatever it takes to try and steer this system obviously more towards tumor regression rather than tumor progression. How do we do this? We try to really cover the entire value chain from evidence to implementation. So on one hand, we do what most foundations do, which is grant giving. We call this science philanthropy. Here it's mostly about creating evidence, figuring out new mechanisms of action, biomarkers, therapeutic targets. Then move towards translational philanthropy. So we're supporting a few proof of concept studies where either novel diagnostic or therapeutic approaches are tried out. Maybe just to mention a few, there's a study in France that tries ketogenic diet in combination with checkpoint inhibitors. There is a high fiber diet intervention at MD Anderson in the US. Together with checkpoint inhibitors, there's a personalized diet approach at Weizmann in Israel. So we're looking at all of these different angles. And finally, what's probably a bit special for our foundation is to also be involved in what we call venture philanthropy. So we think that, you know, once proof of concept is established, it also needs to be moved forward. And the way that usually happens is it can be non-profit entities as well, but often it's for-profit seed stage startups that we support. Again, with the ultimate hope to reach patients. Just to give you a sense, a little bit of the color of our network, which you know, is essentially the thing that we're most proud of. We now have a network of really brilliant people across Europe, US, and Israel, that work on these projects really as what they themselves coined the Seerave family. Now, moving over to the Microbiota Vault. So how did we get engaged with this project? Actually brings us back to 2018, a beautiful conference location in Canada, Banff. It was the Keystone Conference on the gut microbiota in health and disease. And, you know, that actually brings me to the first concept: what should foundations do? We very much believe that you need to be close to science. So don't hide in your ivory tower that some of the foundations do, but go out into the field. And then, of course, once you're there, listen carefully and with an open mind. And don't shy away from random conversations. So essentially what happened there is I walked into Maria Gloria Dominguez. And at the time, I was really eager to talk to her because just a few months before, I had my first son who was born by C-section, and I knew about Gloria's work. And thanks to her, performed our homemade vaginal transfer on the son, which, you know, I don't want to actively recommend, but at least so far it had no visible side effects. So we started to talk and about VMT, all sorts of things. And as you can imagine, foundations often get pitched all sorts of ideas. So there was what I would call idea 1, idea 2, idea 3, idea 4 from Gloria. But then there was this idea of the Microbiota Vault, which really stuck to me. And essentially, Gloria explained to me what she and her colleagues would then 2 years later published in Science, the concept that if you look at rural versus Western industrialized people, you can observe a decrease in microbial diversity up to 50%. And we talked about this a lot here already, and some of the data is usually shown in this symposium. And of course, this comes essentially at the same time that we learn that these microbes are really essential in preserving human health. And so what Gloria convinced me at the time, that it may be worth to not wait until we know everything about the microbiome, because that will presumably still take decades, but to start preservation efforts now before it's too late and some of the genetic diversity may disappear. And of course, kind of thinking from a selfish foundation perspective, if we look back at our axis, the microbiome is you know, a core piece to our axis. So what if we invest all our time and resource and efforts into figuring this out, but at the same time, we're losing the genetic diversity? So this is why, you know, back then we immediately started to engage in this project. We thought it's very high risk. It was not really much more than an idea back then, but I'll get into what has since happened. And so that brings me to the third point, kind of the more general role of foundations in the Microbiota Vault initiative. Of course, as I just mentioned, when we met, it was really only a vision in Gloria's mind. And she's had multiple discussions with her network before, but there was nothing tangible. And so given the great impact, though, that this idea could have, we really wanted to help and de-risk the initiative until more bureaucratic funding entities would come in. And I think that's a role small, young foundations should take is not to put forward dozens of pages of proposals, but just believe in people and ideas and make sure that they can at least get off the ground. When thinking of foundations, most people mainly think of them as funding sources, and yes, that's certainly correct, right? Money is an important aspect, but I would argue that our interactions with Gloria and the whole Vault team has proven that there's other factors that are important too. It's essentially sharing brain time, giving feedback on documents, on ideas. The network that we have established is certainly relevant to the Vault, and many of the collaborators that are part of the Vault are also grantees of Seerave and vice versa. So I think it's really more than financials that foundations can and should contribute. So the first step then to drive the initiative forward was to make a theoretical feasibility study. So as I said, it was only an idea. And so back in 2019, so shortly after we met in Banff, we decided together with other foundations and institutions to sponsor a theoretical feasibility study, which was concluded a year later. And essentially that feasibility study laid out the path forward on how such a vault could be built. Step number 2 then was to go towards a launch phase, where the goals were to essentially set up protocols for preservation, sequencing, data sharing, to explore potential locations. Lars just showed Svalbard before, which we've also explored, but also other sites in the Swiss Alps and other places. And of course, there's a lot of legal work to be done around how do you get the right permits to collect the samples, to ship them, to store them. But let me again reiterate that the vault is really a backup solution. So it never ownership is never transferred. It's always in behalf of the local working collection. And what's currently happening is that there are around 1,500 stool samples being collected in a variety of locations. And thanks to the support of also the Rockefeller Foundation, who has become specifically interested in fermented foods, there are also about 200 samples or fermented food items that are being collected in Laos, Ghana, and Thailand that will be part of the initial vault setup. Now, of course, there's still many hurdles ahead for this initiative, which may become key hurdles in making it reality. There's certainly a lack of political will, at least for now. We saw with Norway that it's very important that a government essentially looks at this as their gift to the world, and we still hope to find a government that would take up this responsibility. Fundraising for this topic is not easy, but I think proudly say that the team around the Vault has been very successful so far in getting it off the ground. But as an initiative grows, also the needs grow, and we'll see whether we will manage to also fundraise really at a larger scale. We know that collaborating across the globe is difficult. I think also here we can proudly say that very good collaborations have been built, but it's always difficult across different cultures and legal systems. I think there's still an aspect of competitiveness across science that also makes this collaboration difficult sometimes. I mentioned ethical and legal questions. Of course, these are highly important as we may be dealing with local communities going forward that obviously want to have their sovereign rights over samples and data. And there is still technical questions. I mean, no one can answer the question of how to best preserve a sample over 100 years. But these are all things that we will learn as we go forward. And so that brings me to the next learning. I think, from the perspective of a foundation, we don't try to solve all the questions at the beginning. If you try to do that, you will never start the project. I think it will fall into place as you go. And our approach there is where there is a will, there is a way. And so far that has proven successful for the Vault. We also think that, you know, our role is to offer a neutral platform so that governments, other foundations, communities, societies can actually work together. So it's important to say that, you know, this is not a project of one foundation and a group of scientists, but it will need massive collaboration. And this is where not only us, but other foundations can play an important role in offering such neutral platforms, building bridges across these different entities. And yeah, having said this, while you can see there's already quite a lot of partners on board, some are financing partners, some are more knowledge partners, and some are actively involved in the current launch. It's really important to say that this initiative can only be successful if other entities come to the table, invest their time, their network, their input, and financials. And with that, I think I already come to an end and I'm out of time. Essentially, I want to leave you with the message that, you know, if you personally have any idea on how to solve some of these hurdles, or you have relevant connections, know-how, don't hesitate to reach out to anyone in the Vault team or even myself. My email is right down here, and we'll be happy to interact. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand back to Beatrice.
Thank you so much, Manuel, for your super nice introduction about how foundations can help us in science. So thanks again. And we will be back to you probably with some questions and comments in the general discussion. So thanks again.